If someone has a baby that dies, a miscarriage or a stillbirth, people are grieving the future they had every right to expect and hope for. So the minute someone sees the blue line in a pregnancy test, they don't see a fetus or a number of cells. They see themselves as a family with this new child. Yeah. They see themselves pushing the pram down the street. They see the baby chair in the back of the car. They start already thinking about how they're going to work around having another child. Will they work? All of those things. And it's complicated because the task of mourning is facing the reality of the death. And with a pregnancy, whether it's a miscarriage or whether it's a stillbirth, you have memories of the pregnancy and you may have the scans, but you don't have memories of the relationship. Yeah. And so it's very important at the time of the death and after the death to spend time with the baby. And through our work at Child Bereavement UK, we've changed practice in every hospital in this country so that people have time where they hold the baby, they create memories. Because for grief, you need memories to focus your grief on. Right. So it may be a picture of a stillborn baby that you're holding, but you have the opportunity to parent that child and have memories of parenting that child, although they've died. And I think one of the big misunderstandings is that people often equate the level of the loss with the number of weeks of pregnancy. And that is by no means the case. It is the emotional investment in the pregnancy that predicts how much loss it is. So it may be that you've had 4 IVFs and this is the first pregnancy that you've had. And you may have got to 12 weeks and you think you're past the difficult line. You know, once you're 12 weeks, your 1 in 4 miscarriage stats go up. You're much more likely to have a healthy baby. But then you have a miscarriage and you feel utterly devastated. So none of us know. And for people who are grieving the death of a baby or a child, the important thing is to acknowledge that this is something they really need to support themselves to go through. And often I think people think what you don't know, what you haven't seen, you're not going to miss. And people miss the future they dreamed of. And that's a tough thing to grieve.
I think one other thing I noticed, we experienced it within our family, was just actually how common it is. So when we're going through this process, we're explaining it to other friends, and often they'd been through this stillbirth process, often way beyond 3 months.
So 1 in 100 babies is a stillbirth. 1 in 4 is a miscarriage. And there are 700,000 babies born a year.
But it's interesting how often people don't really talk about it unless you share yourself. And then suddenly you realise they really feel quite isolated because you don't hear about this in everyday life.
Because of the focus for the grief being creative, having memories of the baby that died, choosing the clothes to wear, maybe bathing the baby, taking a photograph of the baby. I encourage families to take the baby or the child home.
Really?
So that they can have an image of them at home, because there's maybe been this empty cot that's been waiting for a baby.
That's right,
And so putting the baby in it and then having the funeral director collect the child from their home feels much more loving. So it's humanising it that really matters. And we have changed practice. It is better, but it's extremely painful.
Yeah, because at first it almost feels cruel and difficult to have to experience that. But I think it's really quite beautiful that we do that and it's been acknowledged that's the way to deal with it, but it can be very difficult. One thing I did want to touch on, actually, the relationship between the parents, because often they go through the process in different ways and it can be very tumultuous and a big strain on the relationship. And is there any advice you can give to couples to help them through that process together?
Whenever a couple is bereaved, and it may be through a stillbirth, which has a particular complexity, but it can also be other deaths in a family, the couple may grieve differently. Women tend to be loss-oriented. They emote, they grieve, they have this ruminating Sherlock Holmes obsession with every minute of what happened. Men tend to want to get on, move forward, make plans. They're restoration-oriented. And so in a couple, she can think he's like a selfish git and he can dread going home because she's kind of wet rag that never stops crying. When there's a stillbirth, it's another level of complication is that the mother often feels like she's a failure, that somehow she did something wrong, that her body failed her, and he doesn't understand and doesn't get it. And also there's the added complication of they still want another child. And so she has to overcome that barrier of fear to dare to let herself trust again, be pregnant again, and then go through the pregnancy. And he probably wants a child much quicker than she does. He may be ready for it. Not always by any means, because nothing is always. But for a couple, it's a very intense process. And the only thing that helps them is communicating, telling each other and allowing each other to have their differences, to be different and to voice them and not try and push the other one to be like the other one.
Yeah.